The first thing I noticed that morning wasn't the sunrise streaming through the kitchen window. It wasn't the smell of coffee I'd mechanically prepared or the sound of his footsteps upstairs. It was the bruise on my cheek, dark purple and throbbing, a constant reminder that everything had changed. I stood there, staring at my reflection in the microwave door, and I realized something terrifying. This was my life now, unless I did something about it. My hands were shaking as I cracked eggs into the pan. Not from fear this time, though fear was there, coiled tight in my chest like a spring. No, I was shaking because for the first time in 6 months, I wasn't going to stay silent. I wasn't going to pretend everything was okay. That morning, standing in our small kitchen in suburban Ohio, with the autumn light filtering through lace curtains my mother had given us as a wedding gift, I made a choice. He thought I would cower. He thought I would make his breakfast, kiss his cheek, and send him off to work like nothing had happened. But I had a plan. And by the time the sun set that day, everything would be different. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and this is the story of how one quiet Tuesday morning changed my life forever. But to understand that morning, you need to understand how I got there. How does love turn into fear? How does the person who promised to protect you become the one you're most afraid of? I've asked myself these questions 1,000 times, lying awake at night, replaying every moment, every choice, trying to pinpoint exactly when things went wrong. The truth is, it wasn't one moment, it was 1,000 small moments, barely noticeable at first, that built into something I could no longer ignore. And maybe that's the scariest part. Because if you'd asked me 3 years ago if I would ever be in this situation, I would have laughed. Not me, not us. We were different. We were in love. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because what happened to me, what I'm about to share with you, it's not just my story. It's a story that happens every day, in every town, to people you'd never suspect. And maybe, just maybe, by sharing it, I can help someone else recognize the signs before it's too late. I met David on a rainy Thursday in March, 5 years before that fateful morning. I was 26, working as a pediatric nurse at Cleveland General Hospital, and he was 32, a mechanical engineer for a manufacturing company downtown. We met at a coffee shop near the hospital, both of us seeking shelter from an unexpected downpour. He offered me his newspaper to cover my head as we waited under the awning, and when I laughed at the absurdity of it, tiny newsprint smudges already forming on my hair, he smiled this genuine, warm smile that made my heart skip. We talked for 2 hours that day, long after the rain stopped. He told me about his job, about growing up in a small town in Pennsylvania, about his dream of designing sustainable machinery. I told him about my patients, about the little girl in room 412 who was convinced I was a superhero because I could give shots without making her cry. He listened. Really listened. Not the polite nodding people do when they're waiting for their turn to talk, but genuine interest. He asked questions. He remembered the details. When we finally exchanged numbers, I felt like I'd known him for years. Our courtship was everything I'd dreamed of. David was attentive, thoughtful, romantic in a quiet, understated way. He brought me soup when I worked double shifts. He remembered that I hated roses but loved tulips. He got along with my parents, made my younger brother laugh, and treated my friends with respect. 6 months in, he took me to this little cabin by Lake Erie for the weekend. We spent 2 days hiking, cooking meals together, talking about everything and nothing. On the second night, sitting by a fire he'd built, he told me he loved me. I said it back without hesitation because I meant it. I loved him. I loved the way he made me feel safe, cherished, like I was the most important person in his world. Looking back now, I wonder if that feeling of safety was what made me miss the early signs. Because, when you feel, the first time I noticed something off was about a year into our relationship. We were at a work party for his company. One of those semi-formal events where everyone's trying too hard to impress the bosses. I was talking to one of his colleagues, Marcus, a nice guy who'd recently become a father. He was showing me pictures of his newborn son, and I was genuinely interested, asking questions about sleep schedules and feeding routines. Nurse habit, I suppose. When we got in the car to go home, David was quiet. Not unusual. He often needed time to decompress after social events. But then, as we pulled into our apartment complex, he said something that stuck with me. "You seemed really interested in Marcus tonight." There was an edge to his voice I hadn't heard before. I laughed it off, explained about the baby pictures, but he just nodded, his jaw tight. The rest of the night was tense, uncomfortable. The next morning, he apologized, said he was stressed about a project at work, that he knew he was being ridiculous. I accepted the apology. I wanted to believe it was a one-time thing. and for a while it seemed like it was. We got engaged 2 years after we met. David proposed at the same coffee shop where we'd first talked, which I thought was incredibly romantic. We planned a small wedding, just family and close friends, at a garden venue outside the city. I remember my wedding day so clearly. The weather was perfect, warm but not too hot, with a gentle breeze that made my veil flutter. My mother cried during the ceremony. My father hugged David and told him to take care of his little girl. When David and I exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other in good times and bad, I believed every word. I believed we would be happy. I believed we would grow old together. I believed in us. The reception was beautiful. We danced, we laughed, we celebrated with the people we loved most. At one point, late in the evening, David pulled me aside, away from the crowd. He cupped my face in his hands and said, "You're mine now, forever." At the time, I thought it was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to me. Forever. The word felt like a promise, like safety, like coming home. The first year of marriage was mostly good. We moved into a small house in the suburbs, a 2-bedroom ranch with a fenced backyard that David said would be perfect for kids someday. I decorated our home with care, mixing my things with his, creating a space that felt like ours. We hosted dinners for friends. We took weekend trips to visit family. We talked about the future, about maybe starting a family in a few years, about saving for a bigger house eventually. But there were moments, small moments that I brushed aside, that should have warned me. David started commenting on my clothes. Not all the time, just occasionally. He'd suggest that a particular dress was too tight, or that a skirt was too short. "I just don't want other guys looking at what's mine," he'd say with a smile, like it was a compliment. I started choosing my outfits more carefully, avoiding anything that might upset him. He also became particular about my phone. He'd ask who I was texting, get irritated if I didn't respond to his messages right away. "I just worry about you," he'd explain. "Is that so wrong?" And I'd feel guilty for being annoyed. The first time he grabbed me roughly was during an argument about money. I'd bought a new pair of shoes, nothing expensive, just $30 at a sale. But David came home from work in a bad mood, saw the shoebox, and lost it. He started yelling about how we were trying to save, how I was being irresponsible, how I didn't respect him or our goals. I tried to explain, tried to calm him down, but he just got angrier. Then he grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to hurt, and said, "Are you even listening to me?" I was so shocked I couldn't speak. He'd never touched me like that before. After a few seconds, he let go. And I saw something flash across his face. Regret, maybe, or surprise at his own actions. He apologized immediately, said he didn't know what came over him, promised it would never happen again. He was so remorseful, so genuinely upset with himself, that I believed him. I told myself it was a one-time thing, stress from work, nothing more. I even felt bad for upsetting him in the first place. That's how it starts, you know. You make excuses for them, and then you start making excuses for yourself. But it did happen again, 3 months later during another argument, this time about me working late shifts. He shoved me, not hard, but enough to make me stumble backward again. Immediate apologies, tears even. He begged me to forgive him. Said he didn't know why he got so angry, promised he'd get help, see someone, work on his temper. I wanted to believe him so badly. This was my husband. The man I'd vowed to spend my life with. The man who'd held me while I cried about losing patience at work, who'd surprised me with breakfast in bed just last week, who'd told me I was his whole world. People have problems, I told myself. Marriages aren't perfect. We can work through this, but the incidents became more frequent. A pushed shoulder here, a grabbed wrist there. The verbal abuse escalated too. He'd call me stupid during arguments, tell me I was ungrateful, say that no one would put up with me the way he did. And then, hours later, he'd be sweet again, bringing me flowers, cooking dinner, acting like the David I'd fallen in love with. I started walking on eggshells in my own home. I monitored everything I said, everything I did, trying to predict what might set him off. I stopped seeing friends as much because going out often led to arguments. I quit the book club I'd loved because David said I was choosing strangers over him. I started calling in sick to work events because bringing him led to tension and not bringing him led to accusations. My world got smaller and smaller until it was just me, David, and this growing fear that I couldn't name. My mom noticed the change. 6 months before that fateful morning, she came over for coffee and asked if everything was okay. I said yes, of course, everything's fine, we're happy. But she looked at me with this expression that said she didn't quite believe me. "You know you can talk to me about anything," she said quietly. I wanted to tell her. God, I wanted to tell her everything. But how do you explain to your mother that the man she hugged at your wedding, the man your father trusts, is hurting you? How do you admit that you're trapped in your own home, afraid of your own husband? The night before that Tuesday morning was the worst it had ever been. David came home from work angry about something his boss had said. I'd made his favorite dinner, pot roast with potatoes and carrots, trying to lighten his mood. But nothing I did was right. The meat was too dry. I'd forgotten to buy his preferred brand of beer. Why was the house such a mess? Didn't I do anything all day? Each complaint built on the last until he was shouting, his face red with rage. I tried to stay calm, tried to use the techniques I'd read about online for de-escalating situations, but then I made a mistake. I suggested gently that maybe he should talk to someone about his stress. That's when he hit me. Not a shove or a grab this time. A full-handed slap across my face that made my ears ring and brought tears to my eyes instantly. The pain was shocking, but worse was the look in his eyes. For a split second, there was nothing there. No recognition, no love, no remorse. Just cold anger. Then, just as quickly, it passed, and he looked horrified at what he'd done. He fell to his knees, literally begging for forgiveness, sobbing into his hands. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know what's wrong with me. Please don't leave me. I love you so much. I'll change. I promise I'll change. Part of me wanted to comfort him. That's how twisted things had become. I was standing there with a throbbing cheek, and part of me wanted to tell him it was okay. But another part of me, a part that had been quiet for too long, said enough. This is enough. I didn't say anything. I just walked upstairs to our bedroom, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the bed, touching my face gingerly. I could already feel it swelling. By morning, I knew there would be a bruise. And that's when the plan started forming in my mind. Sitting there in the dark, listening to David cry downstairs, I realized something crucial. This wasn't going to stop. He wasn't going to change, and if I didn't do something, it was only going to get worse. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking through every option. I could leave, just pack a bag and go. But where? My parents lived 3 hours away, and showing up on their doorstep with a black eye would break their hearts. Friends? Most of them had drifted away over the past year. And what about work? David knew where I worked. He knew my schedule. If I left without a plan, without protection, what would stop him from showing up at the hospital? What would stop him from talking me into coming back, promising change like he always did? No, leaving without backup wasn't safe. I needed help. Real help. I needed to make sure that when I walked away, I could stay away. And I needed to make sure he couldn't hurt me or manipulate me into returning. That's when I remembered something. One of my patients' mothers had told me, months ago. She'd been in an abusive relationship and had finally gotten out with help from a local organization. She'd mentioned keeping evidence, documenting everything, making a safety plan. As the sun started to rise that Tuesday morning, I made my decision. I got up quietly, careful not to wake David, who'd eventually come to bed and passed out beside me. I looked at my face in the bathroom mirror. The bruise was dark, unmistakable. I took my phone and photographed it from several angles. Then I went through my phone's photo gallery. I'd been documenting for a while without fully realizing it. Pictures I'd taken of bruises on my arms, screenshots of aggressive text messages David had sent, voice memos I'd recorded during arguments. I had evidence. I had proof. Now I just needed to use it. I went downstairs and started making breakfast, just like I did every morning. Coffee, eggs, toast. The routine was comforting in a way, gave me something to focus on while my mind raced. I heard David's footsteps upstairs, heard the shower turn on. He'd be down in 20 minutes, expecting everything to be normal, expecting me to have forgiven him by morning like I always did. While the eggs cooked, I called the domestic violence hotline I'd found online weeks ago, but had been too scared to actually contact. A kind voice answered, a woman named Patricia, who didn't rush me, who listened as I quietly explained my situation. You're incredibly brave for calling, she said. And yes, we can help you, but I need you to be safe. Is he in the house right now? I confirmed he was upstairs. She talked me through creating an immediate safety plan. After we hung up, I called someone else. Someone I should have called so much sooner. I called 911. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone, but I made the call. I told them I needed help. I told them my husband had assaulted me. I told them I was afraid. The dispatcher was calm, professional. She said officers were on their way. She asked if I could safely wait outside, but I said no, that would alert David something was wrong. She told me to stay on the line, to stay in the kitchen where I could see the front door. I heard David coming down the stairs, humming something under his breath. How could he be humming? How could he act like nothing had happened? He walked into the kitchen wearing his work clothes, his hair still damp from the shower. When he saw me, his face fell. Sarah, baby, your face. He moved toward me like he was going to touch my cheek, examine it, comfort me perhaps. I stepped back. He noticed. I am so sorry about last night. I don't know what came over me. I'm going to get help, I promise. I'm going to call a therapist today. The same promises I'd heard before. The same script. But this time, I didn't accept it. Okay, I said quietly, turning back to the stove. Act normal, I told myself. Just a few more minutes. He seemed relieved by my response, probably thinking he'd dodged another crisis, that we'd moved past this like we'd moved past everything else. He sat down at the table, checked his phone, started talking about his day ahead. And that's when the doorbell rang. David looked up, confused. Who would be here this early? I didn't answer. I walked to the front door, my heart pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. I opened the door to find 2 police officers standing on our porch. Sarah Mitchell? One of them asked. I nodded. We're responding to your call. David appeared behind me. What's going on? Sarah, what's happening? His voice had that edge to it, the one I'd learned to recognize as the precursor to anger. One of the officers, a woman with kind eyes, addressed him directly. Sir, we need you to step outside, please. Why? What is this about? He looked at me, betrayal and confusion on his face. Sarah, what did you do? The male officer repeated more firmly. Sir, you need to step outside now. And that's when David's expression changed. The confusion melted away, replaced by cold calculation. He knew, he understood what was happening. And for just a moment, I saw real fear in his eyes. They took my statement there in our living room while David sat in the police car outside. I showed them the bruise, the photos on my phone, told them about the escalating violence. The female officer, whose name tag read Anderson, was gentle but thorough. She explained my options. I could file charges. I could get an emergency protection order. They could connect me with resources, shelters if I needed. Counseling, legal aid. What you did took tremendous courage, Officer Anderson said. Most people in your situation wait much longer to ask for help. Some never do. I thought about that, about how close I'd come to being one of those people who never called, who just accepted this as their life. David was arrested that morning, charged with domestic assault. As they led him to the patrol car, he looked back at me through the window, and I couldn't read his expression. Was it anger? Regret? Disbelief? Maybe all 3. I stood in the doorway of the home we'd shared and watched them drive away, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. The days that followed were complicated. My parents drove down immediately when I called them. My mother cried, apologized for not pushing harder when she'd sensed something was wrong. My father was quiet, processing, but he hugged me tighter than he had in years. I stayed with them for a while, took leave from work to sort things out. The legal process was exhausting. Court dates, protective orders, lawyers. David hired a good attorney, tried to paint me as unstable, claimed I was exaggerating. But the evidence spoke for itself. The photos, the medical documentation from the hospital where they'd examined my injuries, testimonies from neighbors who'd heard arguments. 3 months after that Tuesday morning, David pleaded guilty to assault in exchange for probation, anger management classes, and a permanent restraining order. Our divorce was finalized 6 months later. I didn't ask for much, just wanted to be free. He had to sell the house. I didn't want it anyway. Too many bad memories. The first year after leaving David was hard in ways I didn't expect. I'd thought once I was free, everything would be better. And in many ways it was. I wasn't afraid anymore. I could breathe, but I also felt lost. I'd spent so much energy surviving that I'd forgotten who I was beyond that. I started therapy, real intensive therapy, with a counselor who specialized in domestic violence survivors. Dr. Chen helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't just a bad relationship. It was abuse. Textbook abuse. The isolation, the control, the escalating violence, the cycle of explosion and apology. She helped me work through the guilt I felt, the questions that haunted me. Why didn't I leave sooner? How did I let it get that bad? Why did I make excuses for him? She explained that abuse is designed to trap you, that it's not about being smart or strong enough to leave, it's about being systematically broken down until leaving seems impossible. Slowly, I started rebuilding my life. I went back to work, though I transferred to a different hospital, needed a fresh start. I reconnected with old friends, the ones who'd been patient, who'd been waiting for me to reach out. I moved into a small apartment downtown. Nothing fancy, but it was mine, all mine. I decorated it exactly how I wanted. Bright colors, plants everywhere, photos of family and friends. No one to tell me it was too much or not his style. I started doing things I'd given up. I joined a new book club. I took a pottery class. I went to concerts and movies and brunches without checking my phone constantly, without worrying about getting home by a certain time. I learned to trust my own judgment again, to listen to my instincts instead of second-guessing everything. It wasn't linear. Some days were great. Some days I'd hear a door slam or see someone who looked like David from behind and I'd freeze, my heart racing. But those moments became less frequent over time. About a year and a half after that Tuesday morning, I was having coffee with my friend Rachel, someone who'd stuck by me through everything. She asked how I was really doing, not the polite version, but the truth. I thought about it for a moment before answering. "I'm okay," I said. "Actually, I'm better than okay. I'm happy. Not the kind of happy where everything's perfect, but happy in a real way. I like my life. I like who I'm becoming." And I meant it. I'd learned things about myself I never would have known otherwise. I learned I was stronger than I'd imagined. I learned that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. I learned that love shouldn't hurt, shouldn't make you smaller, shouldn't require you to lose yourself. Real love builds you up. Now, it makes you feel safe to be exactly who you are. I also learned something that might surprise you. I learned to forgive David. Not for him, but for me. Holding on to anger and hatred was like drinking poison and expecting him to die. It wasn't serving me. Forgiveness didn't mean what he did was okay. It didn't mean I'd forgotten or that there shouldn't be consequences. It just meant I was choosing to let go of the power his actions had over my emotional state. He was living his life, dealing with his own consequences, and I deserved to be free. Truly free. Not just physically, but emotionally. Dr. Chen helped me understand that David was probably dealing with his own issues. Maybe things from his childhood, maybe mental health problems he'd never addressed. That didn't excuse his behavior. Nothing could. But it helped me see him as a flawed, troubled person rather than a monster. And that helped me move forward. I want to be clear about something though. My story had a relatively good outcome. I got help. I got out. I had support. Not everyone does. There are women and men still trapped in situations like mine, some far worse. There are people who call for help and don't get it. There are people who try to leave and can't. There are people who lose their lives to domestic violence every single day. I think about them often. I think about how easily I could have been one of them if I'd waited longer, if David's violence had escalated faster, if I hadn't made that call. And I feel a responsibility to speak up, to share my story, to help break the silence that keeps so many people trapped. Because here's what I learned. Abuse thrives in secrecy. It survives when victims are too ashamed to tell anyone, when family and friends don't know how to help, when society treats it as a private matter rather than the crime it is. If you're reading this, if any part of my story resonates with you, please listen to what I'm about to say. If you're in a relationship where you feel afraid, where you're walking on eggshells, where love comes with conditions and control, that's not normal. That's not what love looks like. You deserve better. I don't care what they've told you about how no one else will love you, about how you're too sensitive, about how you made them do it. Those are lies designed to keep you trapped. You deserve to feel safe. You deserve to be treated with respect. You deserve a partner who builds you up instead of tearing you down. And leaving doesn't make you weak or a failure. Sometimes leaving is the bravest, strongest thing you can do. I know it's scary. I know it feels impossible. I know you might love them despite everything. But I also know that staying in a situation like that doesn't get better on its own. Without serious intervention and change, which has to come from them, and is honestly rare, it only gets worse. There are resources available. Domestic violence hotlines, where trained counselors can help you make a safety plan. Shelters where you can stay if you need to leave immediately. Legal services that can help you navigate protection orders and divorce. Support groups where you can talk to other survivors who understand exactly what you're going through. You don't have to figure it all out alone. You don't have to be perfect or have all the answers. You just have to take one small step, make one phone call. Tell one person you trust. Start documenting what's happening. That's how it begins. That's how you take your power back. One small, brave decision at a time. And if you're not in this situation but you know someone who might be, please don't turn away. Don't judge. Don't ask why they don't just leave. Instead, let them know you're there, that you believe them, that you'll support them whatever they decide to do. Your support could save their life. It's been 3 years now since that Tuesday morning. 3 years since I stood in my kitchen with a bruised face and a phone in my hand, making the call that changed everything. My life looks completely different now. I'm in a good place, surrounded by people who genuinely care about me, doing work I love, living without fear. I've even started dating again, carefully taking my time, listening to my instincts. Not everyone who shows interest is David. Not every relationship ends in abuse. I'm learning to trust again while also maintaining healthy boundaries. I'm learning the difference between love and control, between caring and possession. And I'm learning that I'm worthy of real, healthy love, the kind that doesn't leave bruises. Sometimes I drive past the house David and I shared. It's been painted a different color now, different family living there, probably no idea of what happened within those walls. I don't feel sad when I see it. I don't feel angry either. Mostly I feel grateful. Grateful that I got out, Grateful for the strength I found when I needed it most. Grateful for the second chance at life that not everyone gets. That morning, when I opened the door to those police officers, I was terrified. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if I was making the right choice, but I knew I couldn't continue living the way I had been. And that knowledge, that certainty that something had to change, was enough to push me forward. If I could go back and tell myself something on that morning, standing in the kitchen with shaking hands, it would be this: you're doing the right thing. It's going to be hard, maybe the hardest thing you've ever done, but you're going to survive. More than survive. You're going to heal, grow, and build a life you actually want to live. The fear you feel right now won't last forever. The pain will fade. And one day, you'll wake up and realize you've gone hours, maybe even days, without thinking about him at all. You'll realize you're genuinely happy. And you'll be proud of yourself for having the courage to choose yourself, to choose life, to choose freedom. So here I am, 3 years later, telling you this story. Not for sympathy, not for attention, but because I believe stories have power. They help us feel less alone. They show us what's possible. They remind us that we're stronger than we think. My story isn't special. Thousands of people go through similar experiences every day. But every story matters. Every person who speaks up makes it a little easier for the next person to do the same. And maybe, just maybe, someone reading this will recognize themselves in my words and realize they don't have to live this way. They deserve better. They can get out. They can survive. They can heal. I want to ask you something. How did this story make you feel? Could you imagine being in this situation? What would you do if someone you loved showed signs of being in an abusive relationship? These aren't easy questions, but they're important ones, because domestic violence doesn't discriminate. It happens in every community, every socioeconomic class, every race, every religion. It could happen to someone you know. It could happen to you. And we all have a responsibility to recognize it, talk about it, and help when we can. If this story resonated with you, I encourage you to share it. Not because I need the attention, but because someone in your life might need to hear it. Someone might be sitting at their kitchen table right now, with a bruised face and a breaking heart, wondering if they're crazy, wondering if it's really that bad, wondering if they should just try harder to make it work. Let them know it's not their fault. Let them know help is available. Let them know they deserve better. Let them know they can survive this. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for taking the time to hear about that Tuesday morning and everything that came before and after it. If you found this meaningful, please consider subscribing for more true stories that explore the resilience of the human spirit. And please, let us know in the comments what you think. Where are you watching from? Have you or someone you know experienced something similar? What message do you think needs to be shared about domestic violence? Your voice matters. Your story matters. And together, we can break the silence.